Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show right here on VoiceAmerica.com, America's Voice. We're in our 24th year here on Voice America. I've been on many other networks and stations, but I have stayed consistent with Voice America. And this is the program that shows you how to turn your obstacles into opportunities and your problems into solutions and make your dreams come true. And we have a wonderful show for you as we do each week. We have an incredible expert who went from being a Marine to a Benedictine monk to a financial expert. His name is Doug Lyman. He has an unconventional journey which reflects his unique perspective on wealth and purpose. After graduating top of his class from Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, Doug spent 2 decades as a monk while leading a prestigious school's math department. Transitioning to finance in 2017, he became a partner at Longview Asset Management, overseeing $250 million in assets. He has a best-selling book, From Monk to Money Manager, a former monk's financial guide to becoming a little bit wealthy and why that's okay. And he has a brand new book, and that's the one we're going to talk about today, Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram. And we'll tell you what that is. Doug combines the Enneagram with modern psychology to help us transform our financial behaviors. And he's a sought-after speaker and coach, and he helps clients align money with their deepest values and their deepest purpose. Welcome, Doug.
Well, thank you, Patricia. What a great opening. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Oh, you're welcome. So, of course, the first thing we think of is, wait a minute, you went from being a monk, right? And then
Hmm.
there you went to being, no, from a Marine to a monk,
Yep.
a Marine first.
Yep.
Usually it's the other way around.
Well, I, it's just, I don't know if it's ever either way. Either way is rather rare.
It
Any way
is
you want to split
rare.
it.
It is rare. So let's talk about how you went from Marine, which is very structured,
Hmm.
right? Very regimented,
Hmm.
very purposeful,
Hmm.
which also could be part of a monk's life too, right?
Exactly right. That's why I was attracted to it. So when I was in the Marines, there were so many things I loved about the Marines, and I'm very grateful for the time I was there. But when I was deciding to leave the Marine Corps, the question was, what could I do that would give me the similar sense of purpose, the structure, the camaraderie, the esprit de corps, all the things that I loved about the Marines and the discipline without the blowing people up part, which I kind of decided wasn't a good life choice, that I didn't need to be running around with unresolved anger issues and blowing people up with high explosives. That probably wasn't the best thing I could be doing with my life. So I decided that I would go join a monastery and see if I could. Well, I did it for a number of reasons, but I was looking for my highest purpose and meaning in life. I didn't have any real faith going into the monastery. I figured if I was going to find God, where else would be a better place to do that than in a monastery? So I just kind of gave it a shot, and it became a 20-year journey that I really had some ups and downs, but overall was a very positive experience.
Wow. Mm. How did you then move from that to being a financial expert?
Okay, that's a long and crazy story. But part of the reason why I joined the monastery was to get away from the world of money and materialism forever. I thought, and it was also a great way to flabbergast my parents and rebel against kind of the way I was raised. You wouldn't think that that would be an act of rebellion, but it kind of was, considering how my childhood was structured. But yeah, and so the irony is that a couple of years after I joined the monastery, the community went bankrupt, and so someone had to figure out that financial mess. And by an ironic twist of fate, it fell onto my shoulders. Even though I was financially illiterate at the time, I didn't really know anything about money because growing up in my home, talking about money was harder than talking about sex. It was like the taboo topic that nobody wanted to ever address. And it turns out I was in a community where everyone hated dealing with money. We all had this really, what I would say, avoidant attitude towards it. And so the financial problems had built up for quite a while before I even got there, and they got worse, when I was there. And I decided, well, I couldn't do a worse. The bar was set pretty low. I couldn't do a worse job than my predecessor in terms of managing the finances. So I gave a shot at it and went to a bookstore and grabbed every book on finance personal finance I could find, and devoured them. And took me a couple of years to figure it all out, but eventually got the community on a solid financial footing. But I was also in a teaching order. So everyone in our community we worked at a private school. And I was at the time also the chair of the mathematics department, and decided that we should probably teach kids the basics of finance. Like financial literacy, in my opinion, is more important than teaching the quadratic formula or the Pythagorean theorem. All those things were very important too. And so then fast forward several years, one day for a class project, I opened up the school retirement plan to show the kids how it worked, just to give them some real hands-on, real world applications and experiences, and found it was a complete train wreck. The whole thing was a mess. So I went looking for a company that I thought could do a better job of managing the money, and I couldn't find one. It turns out it was an endemic problem across the country. And then I realized that this was a huge pain point and a potential for a new career. So I launched my own investment advisory firm from inside the monastery to try to build better teacher retirement
Wow.
plans. And then realized that was going to be incompatible really fundamentally for a number of reasons with my monastic, commitments and duties. And so I made the decision and there's a number of reasons for leaving, but essentially I then jumped ship, went into finance, and then took my tiny little company and joined it with a larger firm. And that's kind of what launched my career. And then in a weird stroke of luck, this was the kind of the sometimes just the universe gives you a big green light. Right when I jumped into finance, into doing this project, the New York Times came out with a 6-piece expose, like one big article every month, on the problem of teacher retirement plans. Of what they were
Wow.
talking about they were addressing the same thing that I had seen from a boots on the ground perspective. And I reached out to them and said, "Hey, I love these articles, and here's what I'm doing." And to solve it, and they got excited. Sent a guy named Ron Lieber, who's the financial columnist for the New York Times, sent him out to Santa Fe. We spent a day together, and they did a big spread on me in the business section of the Times that went
Wow.
viral. And then I got this 2-book deal from HarperCollins, and now I'm working. That's where I'm at now, getting the second book out.
Wow. Well, you say the universe, it could be being a monk, it could be God that
Mm-hmm.
led you to this, because that's pretty remarkable, the
Mm-hmm.
timing of all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're where you're supposed to be, Doug. That's for sure. That's for sure. I guess my question is why why people have a lot of trouble with money?
Well,
Why is it? Is it, it's like you said, we talk about sex more than we'll talk about money.
right.
Is it that we're just afraid that we're attaching our worth to our money, and we're afraid for people to know that? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to the Enneagram, which we'll talk about maybe in more depth in a moment. But behind all that is trauma. Is we all have, I think, different forms of financial trauma that we experience in life, and that manifests in very unique ways for each of us. It isn't a one size fits all problem or solution. And that's why I wrote this book, to sort of there's these 9 archetypes of personality that the Enneagram explains, and it explains how your ego is structured fundamentally, because there's only so many ways you can design an ego and have it work properly. And we fall into these patterns of personality that are very broad and very, very broad strokes. And then within each of them, our money trauma manifests in very, very unique ways, which I'd be happy to go through in more detail with you.
So you're saying it comes from our background, the way we've been raised, what we've
Mhm.
been trained,
Yeah.
right? Our mindset, our belief, right? Yeah. Did you, because of your spiritual and religious teachings as a monk,
Mhm.
was there any resistance to working with money? I know
Oh,
you were teaching it.
absolutely. Well, so I had to overcome my money trauma first, and had to, like, it was very, there's a cliche in the writing world that most writers write for themselves, and I think it's very true for my books. It's like everything I wish I had known about money. If
Mm.
I could go back in time with a time machine and like hand my 20 something self these books, like this is all the things that I've learned along the way to try to help. And the goal really is, I think, to help people avoid unnecessary suffering. because when we don't get our finances straight, it causes all kinds of tremendous amounts of stress. It basically hamstrings our ability to live the life that we really want. And my goal is to help people master their money so they can live a life that makes their soul sing, and really live a life of meaning and purpose. And because money is a tool for most actions. And
Yeah.
maybe going back to your other question, here's what if I could summarize it in a nutshell. A good friend of mine, Richard Rohr, who wrote the foreword to my book, he had a great pithy line. He said, if we don't transform our pain, our trauma, if we don't transform our trauma, we are destined to transmit it, most especially to those that we love, including our children.
Yeah.
And so, since money is the tool for most actions, when we have this trauma inside of ourselves, it gets manifested in how we spend, earn, save, invest our money in ways that can really, again, cause suffering that doesn't necessarily need to happen. And if we can help people avoid that, that would be one of my real goals of this book.
Yeah, I think that's so important. You know, there's a saying, money doesn't buy happiness, and I don't really buy that. I
Well,
don't, because I think I don't mean, gold and jewels
right,
and palaces.
right.
But we're talking about, because to me, when I look at money, I see freedom. That's the
Mm-hmm.
first thing I see.
Absolutely.
Without it, I don't have as many choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's exactly right. It gives you freedom and gives you options, is what it does. And it gives you options to live that life that makes your soul sing, which is
Yeah.
so important. And so, right,
Yeah.
spot on.
All right. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to start talking about this book and one of the words in the book, Taming Your Money Monster, and how we're 9 paths to money mastery using the Enneagram. Well, what is the Enneagram? And so Doug is going to explain that, and then we'll start going into the 9 types, and you can see which one you are. And Doug, I'm wondering if sometimes we're more than one, or we might be a different one at a different time
Mm-hmm.
in terms of
Absolutely.
types. So,
Absolutely.
we can listen to all of them and see kind of where we fit. All right. Again, my guest is Doug Lyman, and his book is Taming Your Money Monster. And he went from being a monk to a money manager to a financial guide. And he's helped thousands of people. He does TED Talks. You can go onto his website, which is Doug Lynam, Lynam.com. Right? You're listening to the Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show right here on voiceamerica.com, and we will be right back. Hi, we are back, everyone. I'm Patricia Raskin, and we are talking to Doug Lyman. And his brand new book is called, and I'm going to read it, Taming Your Money Monster: 9 Paths to Money Mastery Using the Enneagram. And he's going to explain what the Enneagram is. But just to recap, Doug is a former Marine. He went from there to being a Benedictine monk. From there, he went to being a financial expert. And he now has become a partner with Longview Asset Management, overseeing 250 million in assets. So welcome back, Doug. I know you've combined psychology and spirituality with money. So let's talk about what the Enneagram is.
Right. Now, I just want to clarify the buyout really quickly. So I am no longer a partner at Longview. I took a buyout about a year ago to finish this book. So I'm now mostly focusing on public speaking and coaching and being an author. So that's my current gig at the moment.
Great, great. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, let's talk about what an Enneagram is.
Okay, so the Enneagram, it's a personality typology system, and it's in trying to figure out who discovered it is like trying to figure out who discovered 1 + 1 = 2, because it's really in my opinion, it's the operating code or system that explains how the human ego is structured in certain ways. Now, your personality has multiple components. You've got your nature, which is your DNA and how your genes express, and then you've got your nurture and how you were raised. And the Enneagram helps explain a big part of the nurture portion of your personality. So it doesn't explain everything, but it gives you an understanding of what your ego defenses were that you developed in childhood to survive the biggest stressors in your childhood environment. And so, as a metaphor, one way to think about it is like this. When you were born, you had a physical umbilical cord that got cut, and that physically separated you from your mother. But you immediately develop what I call a psychological umbilical cord to your caregivers. I mean, your ego becomes highly codependent on them for the first several years of your life, especially, and they do all the driving for you. You're not really competent, obviously, to make decisions for yourself. So your caregivers are doing that for you. But that psychological codependency has to be broken. And it can only be broken by negative emotions. So we have to cut that psychological umbilical cord so you can do what we call individuate and differentiate from your caregivers and develop a unique ego structure and consciousness. And what we now know from the neurobiology, and this goes back to the work of a neurobiologist by the name of Jaak Panksepp, and he was doing studies with mice and rats and other mammals, and they discovered that in all mammals, in the limbic system in the brain, so like in the base, just above the base of your spine, there's only 3 core negative emotions that all mammals have. It's the core circuitry that all your other negative emotions run off of, and that's anger, fear, and sadness. And so the psychological umbilical cord has to be cut by, it's usually a combination of all three, but you generally got hit by one of those negative emotions more than others in your childhood. And particularly in how you were told the word no. Like you have to give children no's in order for them to be survive. Like, don't touch the hot stove, don't kick the dog, don't bite your sister. So how are those boundaries set for you in your childhood? Were they done more with anger, with more sadness or shame or fear? And so that determines what we call, so if you think of the Enneagram, there's 9 types. So think of like a pizza pie or a circle. I actually think of a circle like a color wheel is kind of the most helpful metaphor. And if we break the color wheel into 3, chunks, 3 sectors, as you might call it, and those are called the triads of the Enneagram. So how your psychological umbilical cord was cut, more anger, more sadness, or sadness and shame are sort of interchangeable. And then fear, which of those 3 determines the quadrant you're in. And then there's only 3 ways to process each of those negative emotions. You can either take that pain and you can internalize it, which is kind of like giving yourself an emotional wedgie. You can externalize it, which is kind of like having a food fight with the world, or you can have both. And so that's why there's 9 types. So there's 3 core negative emotions, 3 ways to process that negative emotion, and which of the ones you got hit the most with determines where you land on this color wheel of the Enneagram. And so that kind of gives you kind of a quick overview of what it is, and then we could talk about the 9 types maybe and what they look like.
Yeah. Let's start talking about the nine types. Now, I asked you during a break, what's the most common? And you said there isn't a most common, but there may be one that might be a least common.
Well, there might be one that's most common, but I just don't know that not off the top of my head. But if it is, not by much. It's pretty even. It's a pretty even distribution, except for type 5 seems to be the most uncommon. And I think type 6 might be the most common, but I don't hold me to that.
Okay, so let's start with type 6, Doug.
Okay, type 6. Well, that might not be the best place to
All
start.
right.
If we could start with type 8, it's a little easier.
Sure.
For reasons that are that'll be obvious. We'll come back around. We'll kind of end
Sure.
with 6. So type 8 is what we call they're in the anger triad, and so that cutting of the psychological umbilical cord is what I call your sacred wound. We all have it. We all have to have it. And for type 8, it's anger that they've externalized, and they're typically called the challenger. I give them car names because I think it's helpful for people as metaphors. I call them the Hummer of egos. And so in their childhood, they probably experience a very intrusive environment, or they experience a lot of betrayal or injustice in their life. And that created a lot of anger inside them. And when they externalize it, it creates, each type has a greatest fear. And this is probably the most important part of the Enneagram, is to understand what the core fear of each type is. And then that's kind of what drives their ego. It's sort of the engine of the ego that their operating system that they're sort of running off of. And so for type 8, the challenger, their greatest fear is being harmed or controlled. So they tend to react by pushing against the boundaries or limitations of reality around them. So two examples with that would be like Donald Trump as a type 8, love him or hate him, he's the kind of person who pushes against external boundaries in order to prevent himself from being harmed or controlled by others. Another example is Martin Luther King Jr., also a type 8. So these, always challenging the status quo and hating to be harmed or controlled by the systems around them. So that's a quick overview of 8. That's who's externalizing their anger. And then I'm going to jump over to type 1. And the numbers don't really matter. So don't think of the numbers as having any significance. They're just placeholders. And then the reason I'm jumping to 1 is because they take that pain and they internalize it. And so they drive it towards themselves. And we often call them the perfectionist. I call them the BMW of egos, because their greatest fear is being like bad or defective. So they have this strong inner critic, this voice is always telling them they're not good enough, not doing things right. So they become very perfectionistic about themselves, and also can be very perfectionistic, trying to fix themselves always, but also people around them. They're kind of the reformers of the world who can quickly see what's going wrong in themselves and in others, and are always trying to improve that. So they're also called the improver sometimes. And then I'm going to jump in the middle between the 8 and the 1 is type 9. And then type 9 is called the peacemaker. I call them the RV of egos. Now, the peacemaker, what happens is they have both an internalized anger and an externalized anger. And they basically had a childhood environment where their needs weren't really met, or there wasn't, they felt like they weren't really seen, or speaking up to get their needs met wasn't going to help them any. So they sort of shut down and they sort of go with the flow. It's like their strategy of life is, get along, or I'm messing that one up, but like, anyway, they essentially, they have all this anger inside them. It's like a volcano that they're always trying to repress. They never want to touch it. So they hate conflict, because their greatest fear for the type 9 is a loss of wholeness or fragmentation. Should their anger ever really erupt, they're afraid it's going to blow them apart like the Hulk. This Hulk will come out. So they like their environment to be very peaceful and copacetic around them. And so they're always trying to like not make waves and go along to get along. That's the phrase I was searching for. So that's the anger triad in a nutshell. And maybe I'll pause there for a question or two, and then we can move to the sadness or shame triad.
Yeah, that's interesting. So those are all around anger.
Mm-hmm. Anger. And then if we move into the sadness triad, I'll start with type 4. They're called the helper. I call them the ambulance of egos. And then what they've done is they've taken this sadness and they externalize it. And it's sort of like they feel sad or grief about how they think people perceive them, which could also be called shame. It's both are interchangeable, I think. But the circuitry in the limbic system is actually the sadness circuitry. So it's a little more technically accurate to say sadness, but I think shame sort of captures the flavor of it a little bit more accurately. And so they have this shame that they've externalized. They feel ashamed about how they think people perceive them. And that creates their greatest fear, that they're fundamentally unlovable. And so they're running around helping people compulsively all the time to try to earn love and validation. Like they'll flatter you, they'll give you gifts, they'll be very very warm, they're very kind, they're very loving, but they have this sort of pay to play scheme that they're doing. They're playing kind of a give to get. Like, I'm going to give you all these compliments, I'm going to give you all this help, but they're expecting it to be reciprocated. And so they're sort of, that's why I call them the ambulance of egos. They're sort of rushing around helping other people, but sometimes have a hard time getting their own needs met. So that's a type 2 in a nutshell. I'm going very fast here. I'm just giving a very surface explanation. It's a very deep and complicated system when you get down into the layers.
Yeah, but let me just pause for a minute here. But when you're talking about, that was the type 1, wasn't it? When you were talking about the shame part, the fear and shame? That was
two is shame.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's common for people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think so? I mean, I think it's common for people to overgive because that's so accepted.
Mm-hmm.
People love that. People love to receive.
Mm-hmm.
Then you feel good because you're giving.
Right.
Yes, you do want something, but it also feels good to give. So
Yeah.
it's not one way. I think there's a benefit to the person who's giving. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. But the problem with the two is they tend to overextend themselves with their giving
Mm,
to their own detriment. They sort of run themselves ragged, helping
mm,
other people to the point where their own mental health might deteriorate, or their own financial health might deteriorate.
mm.
We should talk about how this relates to money, but that's a whole nother. We sort of jumped over that part. But then maybe I'll throw in the money monsters to these really quickly. And so the money monsters for these types, what I've done is I've taken and layered on top of the Enneagram what I call the attachment theory of money. And it's just like the attachment theory of relationships, just kind of tweaked a little bit. And what the theory says is that when we have an unhealthy attachment to money, we can either be anxious about it, like kind of like the Ebenezer Scrooge, or if you think of like the TV show Succession or Billions, like people who are just so over focused on money to their own detriment and to the detriment of those around them, or was what I call the avoidant style, which is my type. And people, as I was, that's why I joined the monastery. I was trying to get away from this world of materialism. So they hate paying their bills. They don't like doing their taxes. They sort of push money away in various ways. And because they sort of fear of money or anxiety around it. And so those are the two types of money monsters they can each have. And then, but most of us are what I call a jumbled style. We tend to be anxious or avoidant in different areas of our financial life. So there's what I call the 4 pillars of finance. And the 4 pillars of finance are going to be earning, saving, investing, and giving. So earning, saving, investing, giving are the 4 pillars. And we can be anxious in one of those pillars and avoid in another. So you might be an anxious earner, you make a lot of money, but you spend it all on stuff, you're an avoidant saver, like your money's just going out the door. Or people can be very compulsive savers, but they're terrified of stocks and investing. Or people who are great investors, but they never give back to their community. They never do anything meaningful with their money. So again, so the system, as you can see, as we layer these different systems together, it gets quite complicated. And maybe I should just backtrack and go over the money monsters for the anger type, and then we could go around the circle. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go back to the 8. So their money monsters are what I call the detonator and the dominator. So again, the type 8 hates being harmed or controlled. And so the detonator is the one who blows up their personal budget, or grabs the check at a dinner because they want to feel important, even though the credit card's maxed out. But they got to have the big car, because it makes them feel like they're the big shot on the highway. So they tend to detonate prudent financial limitations because they don't want to be controlled by money. Or they're what I call the dominator, and that would be the type who uses their wealth to really crush other people, or sort of crush it, and in a way that's unhealthy. I'm not saying you shouldn't be successful in your career, of course you should, but the dominator would be the kind of type 8 that's got a very unhealthy, anxious attachment to money. They want it because they can use it to control people and not be controlled themselves. And then I'll jump back to I'll just go to 9 really quickly because I'll go in order. So then the 9, that's the peacemaker, that's the RV of egos that we talked about, and they hate conflict. And so their money monsters are what I call the spud and the dud. So the spud is the money avoidant 9, like the financial couch potato, who could get things done, but doesn't want to deal with the conflict or pain that dealing with their finances brings up. So they don't ever take action. Mm. And then the anxious type 9, I call them the spud and the dud. So the spud's the couch potato. The dud is the anxious type 9, who kind of runs around and does a lot of activity, but they still hate conflict. So they never get to the root of the issues that are really bugging them. So they look productive, but they're not really facing the conflict in front of them. So nothing that they do ever really makes a huge dent or difference in their financial life. So I call them the dud.
Right. Let's pause on that one just because we want to do the other 2 segments, and we're going to come back and work with the other issues. And then we'll kind of tie it all together with, where are we? Because as you said, we may all feel sadness, and we may all feel shame, and maybe we all feel anger at different times, right? Which means that these different types could come out at different times.
Right.
In our lives. So we'll talk about that when we come back. You're listening to the Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show. My guest is Doug Lyman, and his book is Taming Your Money Monster. We'll be right back. Hi, everyone, and we are back. We are back with Doug Lyman, and his latest book is Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram. And he went from being a Marine to a Benedictine monk to a financial expert. And now he travels and he does TED Talks and he has 2 wonderful books. So welcome back, Doug. So let's finish up on some of those types with the Enneagrams, and then I've got a bunch of questions of, what happens in this situation in your life or that situation in your life.
Right. And we probably don't have time to go through all the 9 types on the show, but maybe we went through the anger triad, and then it's the same idea for the shame and the fear triad. There's one type each, as we said, internalizes the pain, externalizes, and has both. And maybe what we could do is I'll jump to the shame triad just for a second and talk about type 3, which is my type, and poke fun at myself a little bit. So it'll give you a sense of what the shame triad looks like. So type 3, you call them the race car. And what that means, or the achievers are often called. So what we do as a type 3 is we have this, our sacred wound is then shame that we've both internalized and externalized, creates our greatest fear of being fundamentally worthless or not having any value. And so then we're always running around trying to do the TED Talks, write the books, start the company, we're always achieving stuff because we're trying to assuage our inner sense of worthlessness. And so it really drives, you can just see how even my own story, my Enneagram type has really shaped my own life, my career path, and then also the struggles and problems that I've had. Because the problem with the type 3 is we're expert mask changers. We're always performing for other people, but we lose touch with our authentic selves. And then the money monsters for the type 3, I call them the barrier, which is the avoidant type 3. We bury our heads in the sand and don't want to look at our problems because of all the shame it brings up, particularly our financial problems. Or what I call the blinger, who wants all the money for status symbols. So it's like, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And so that, and they tend to squander their wealth because they equate their net worth with their self-worth. And then again, the book has got all this laid out. I've got these wonderful ego maps that you can check out in the book, Taming Your Money Monsters. You can actually see how your ego is structured step by step, what your shadow structure is, and then what your path to sort of awakening or enlightenment might be. And it's more than we have time to cover here, but hopefully you got a little teaser about that.
Absolutely. And I could actually identify with the achiever one.
Mm-hmm.
That I could see not every single piece, but a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
That wanting to achieve, and I mean that's a good thing. But again, you want to be able to have peace with it too, Doug. Right? You don't want to be doing it to fill a real hole. So let me ask you some questions, because right now, and we're in 2025, we've had a lot of cuts. A lot of jobs have been lost. There's just, be that as it is, we're in 2025 at the end. People can look up where we are. And so it's been across the board in our country, and it's probably going to affect other countries as well. So now we have people who have been really diligent workers, worked for years, and their job is cut.
Right.
And they may have some severance, but it may not be enough. And so now there's a real problem here. You have the lack.
Yeah.
So, what do you say to those people? Either, and I'm going to give you two types. One is the person who's worked for a company with benefits, very steady. The other is the entrepreneur that all of a sudden, God, I had that client, and now with all the cuts, I don't have it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, talk to us, Doug.
Well, it was a great book called The Art of Taking Action, and I forgot who wrote it, but he said that essentially that action is the antidote to despair.
Right.
Like you have to take action. You're in a difficult spot, so there isn't a simple one size fits all solution. But one of the things that the Enneagram can tell you is what your strengths and weaknesses are, and where you might be focusing your efforts to replace your income or figure out what the next step for your career or life path might be. Because there's certain things that you're going to naturally be suited to your strengths, and we all have a weakness, because every strength has to have a weakness that goes with it. And so what are those? And then to really identify them, and then maybe have a better sense of where you should be looking for that next opportunity. But essentially, you're going to have to do something, unless your pension or if you're financially secure already, then obviously there's no issue there to be resolved. But you're going to have to pivot. You're going to have to find a new way forward, and that's not going to be easy. And again, I can't tell you what that's going to be for you, but knowing what your personality is, your Enneagram is going to tell you how you're likely to react, perhaps in a negative way, and then how you might react in the most positive way towards this challenge in front of you.
Yeah. And as you said, it's taking action. Do you advise that people at that point get some counseling or
Absolutely.
mentoring?
Yeah, I work as a financial coach. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm available. I'm happy to help people with their individual struggles. You can reach me at my website, douglyman.com. But coaching is definitely a great option. It can really help you bust through the stagnant issues that you're facing and help you map out what that path forward is going to be for you in a really clear way.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Yeah. And I think I'd love to ask you about the shame issue because I think for a lot of people, shame kicks in around money.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not enough or I lost it. Look at the investment I made and it didn't pan out. I could have been worth this much and my financial advisor didn't advise me well and I didn't listen or what, all the things. If I bought that house instead of this one, I would have already made this, all the postmortems. And then we live with the shame,
Mm-hmm.
which actually we really don't know what it would have been because we didn't happen.
Right.
Comments about that.
Well, I mean, some of us have shame, and some of us may have anger, and some of us react with fear. It is always we each have a different auto response to these issues. But the shame one is a really hard one because, um, in getting over it, it's going to take, some real contemplative work. So therapy can be helpful. Meditation, journaling, yoga. You need to find a way to, first of all, sit with your pain and not try to avoid it. That's the first part, is to really tap into it and acknowledge it and be with it. And then find a way to have some compassion for yourself and to forgive yourself for the mistakes you made, because those regrets and that shame is going to just eat away at you. And so there needs to be self-forgiveness for any mistakes you made to put yourself in this situation, but also forgiveness for those who may have done you wrong, and you may be really some injustice that's happened there.
Mm.
But essentially, there has to be some spiritual practice. It doesn't. I'm pretty agnostic on which ones you pick, but you're going to need to find a way to really heal those those wounds and that trauma, to let go of that shame, because it eventually is going to prevent you from taking action. You're going to be stuck in that grief and not be able to move forward. So you need to, what is it for you that's going to help you do that?
Yeah. Do you think anger is easier than shame? And the reason I'm asking you that is sometimes the reaction to anger is doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna show them. And sometimes the reaction to shame or sadness is I'm just gonna hide.
Well, not necessarily. So this brings us back to the Enneagram Type 6 that we were talking about earlier, that you asked me to start with. Their response to anger, that's not true. I'm sorry, I got that mixed up. Excuse me. It would be type 9 that we talked about, not 6. 9 is a type with all this anger. They're the type that's going to they actually are going to shut down. And it can cripple them just as easily as shame can. I don't think any one of these emotions is any easier to deal with than the other. They're all crippling when they're taken, when there's when you essentially overdose on any of them, they're going to hamstring you. And even the type, even if you're acting out of anger, if that anger is explosive anger, right, then you can also do a lot more damage to your relationships, to your friendships, to your career,
Hmm.
if that anger comes out in an unhealthy way. So you might be
Hmm.
taking action, but it might not be the right action.
Hmm. All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk to Doug about knowing all of this. What are some healthy strategies all of us can do? It's like preventative health.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's your preventative money health? Whether it's planning, budgeting, looking at all of your finances and going over them every month, whatever it is, he's going to kind of share with us what are some of the antidotes. Like one of them that he said is take action if you've lost your job. That's an antidote.
Mm-hmm.
Start looking, start networking. So, what are some antidotes to some of these feelings that sometimes cripple us around taking positive action around money, which can be very helpful because money helps us move forward,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, that's what we're going to look at when we come back. My guest is Doug Lyman, and his newest book is Taming Your Money Monster: 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram. And we'll be right back with Doug right after the break. Hi, everyone, and we are back. We are talking to Doug Lyman, and his brand new book is Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery Using the Enneagram. And Doug went from being a Marine to a Benedictine monk to a financial expert. Now he does TED Talks and travels the country and does a lot of presentations and also coaches people who, need some help in terms of aligning their money with their purpose. And so welcome back, Doug.
Thanks, Patricia.
So, what do you say to those people, or what are some preventive steps that we can do to help us with healthy money life?
Well, there's really 5 steps that I've outlined in my book, Taming Your Money Monster. And so the first step is just going to have to acknowledge the pain from that childhood wounding, from that sacred wound that we were talking about. Figure out what your type is. If people want to know their type, you can go to my website, douglyman.com, and there's a great Enneagram test there. It's called the IEQ9 Integrative Test. It's the best one on the market. So find out what your type is, and then you need to figure out what that wound was that's causing all that anger, that shame, that fear inside of you. And so knowing what that is. And then the second step is to learn how to stop reacting out of the anger, fear, or sadness that created your money monsters. So you have to know what it is, but then there's all these counter moves that you need to take. And I've outlined them in detail in my book. But essentially each type has, once you know what your money monsters are, then there's specific steps you can take for each of the types that are going to help you to not react, to be proactive, not reactive to the stressors that are in front of you. And then, of course, the third step is we have to learn to be less anxious or avoidant around money. So if you're really, I find the avoidant people have a harder time than the anxious people, because a lot of the money anxious people are already in good financial shape. They're just using the money and making poor choices with it, perhaps. And they're using it maybe not in the best ways. But people who are really money avoidant, they're the ones who need to, maybe learn to be a little more financially literate. They need to learn how to take action or figure out what their next career move is going to be, how to pivot. Maybe they need some coaching. Maybe they need to try something entrepreneurial now in this new economy. So learning how to be less anxious. And there's a whole host of tricks and tips I've laid out in the book to do that. But then the fourth step, of course, is just building a strong financial life through earning, saving, and investing. You have to master all three, because some people are great earners, but they're bad savers. Some people are good savers, but they're bad investors. You need to try to get that strong financial base underneath you, so you have those options. You have that freedom to live that life that makes your soul sing. So you're not trapped in limitations through lack of money. That you don't have the options to do the things that really fulfill your highest purpose. And then the last step and most fun step for me is, using your money and talents to serve a suffering world. That's the final step, I think, is why are we doing this? Why do we care about money so much? Well, of course, we want security and we want safety and we want these options. But I really think if you're doing it for a higher purpose, then it makes everything a whole lot easier, because when you know what your purpose is, as I think Nietzsche said, if you have a why to live, you can endure almost any how. So how you go about doing it, it might not be easy, but it's the journey is fun, so to speak. You're enjoying the ride because you're serving this higher goal. And each Enneagram type has a unique divine sacred gift that I go into in the book, which we won't have time to cover here. But once you know what that sacred gift is, then you can then apply it to your specific situation to really supercharge your motivation and your financial life. So you're living this life of abundance and purpose and meaning.
Doug, what's an example of one of those super gifts?
Oh, okay. So I'll talk about type 3, just to pick up myself, is what I call divine purpose. So when type 3s, as we talked about before, we have this inner sense of worthlessness. And so when we can find the value inside of ourselves, first and foremost, then we're able to see the value in everyone and everything and help those other people find their purpose and serve a higher calling or a higher cause. So, I call the money master for type 3, I call us the builder. So the money monsters for the 3, again, are the barrier, the blinger, and their money master is the builder, who now is achieving things. They're still a race car who's, wants to go after goals and have accomplishments and do big things, but it's no longer about look at me, look at me, look at me. It's look at this other thing that's of service, of use to the wider community and to the world around you.
What's another super gift?
Okay, let's go back to type 8 since we covered them at the beginning. So theirs is divine justice. So they're like Martin Luther King Jr. is a good example. Like they're type 8s hate being harmed or controlled. And so and they have this real sense of injustice when someone violates their boundaries or is trying to harm or control them, they get reactive, they get very have this really strong boundaries they put up. But this sense of injustice no longer is about me, it's about us, it's not a we. It's moving from, and for every type, it's about moving from um, um, it's moving to that sense of what I would call interdependence. So you're moving from we call this the first half of life. You know, when you're kind of building your life and your career, it's all about me, me, me. It's about building your independence. And then the money mastery step is about interdependence. So how do you take this wound, this that becomes, and this is the core teaching of the Enneagram and why it's so helpful, is that your greatest weakness, when you heal it, becomes your greatest strength. So for type 8s, that sense of injustice for themselves becomes a wider sense of, no, I'm going to go out there and fight for the group. I'm going to find justice for whatever manifestation that looks like for you in the world around you.
Great. Closing thoughts. What would you like to leave our listeners with today?
Oh, well, if anything I said resonates with you, please check out my book. And I would appreciate reviews on Amazon and Goodreads if anybody wants them. And if anyone's looking for some coaching, you can reach me on my website, douglyman.com. And I just wish that everyone can tame their money monsters so that they can live that life of higher purpose.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have a couple more minutes. So you have something else kind of cool to share?
Oh, where do you want me to start? I mean, I could go for hours. Maybe we were talking earlier at the beginning about, I think a lot of us, that shame we have around money, it goes back to this idea that money somehow inherent. People get into this dualistic notion around money that is really problematic, that either it's all good or it's all bad. And so we tend to fall into either you got to be St. Francis or you got to be, Gordon Gecko. Like those are the poles that we sort of put money into these two camps. And it's not like that. Money is essentially, I think maybe the big takeaway is that money is just a tool, right? Money is essentially stored work energy. That's what it fundamentally is. And we can use that energy to build bullets or make bandages. We can bomb people or we can build schools. It's really up to us. And I think it's important that we understand these money monsters, because so much of our financial decisions are being run off of maybe unhealthy projections of our ego. But we don't need to demonize money, which is what I had a real problem with the monastery, is the sense that money is the root of evil. Whereas I think Mark Twain humorously said, it's actually the lack of money that's the root of all evil. Like poverty is the problem, not wealth. We don't need to demonize wealth. We need to demonize poverty, because as we now know from the research, your socioeconomic status has a bigger impact on your life expectancy than anything else. If you want to know how long you're going to live, just look at your socioeconomic demographic, because poor people get hit with a laundry list of things you don't want. The stress of being poor is so overwhelmingly intense. It's like walking over a tightrope over a pit of alligators every single day. So that's why poor people have higher rates of obesity, addiction, alcoholism, domestic violence, workplace injuries, and mental health issues. Everything you don't want goes up as your income goes down.
So take a look at Doug's book, Money Mastery, because that can really, really taming your money monster. And that will help you, right, Doug, to really understand what's happening. And you can also contact Doug at douglynam.com, correct?
Correct.
Douglinam.com, Linam. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Thanks, Patricia. Thanks for a great interview. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Stay on the line for a minute. All right, folks, that wraps up this edition of the Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show. You can find me, Patricia, at patriciaraskin.com. If you'd like to get a copy of my newsletter and see all these great guests who come on each week, like Doug, I send it out the first day of every month. So just write to me and you can sign up. Also, if you'd like to get your positive message out, I've interviewed over 6,000 people in my career and I'd love to help you put it all together. So contact me, Patricia at patriciaraskin.com. Remember, stay healthy, stay happy, get the support you need, and know you can make your dreams come true. Until next time, I'm Patricia Raskin. Bye for now.